Welcome to the first day of October. I cannot believe October is here. And in a couple months, I will have to write a new date on my calendar here. I was like, wait, I could barely have gotten used to this year. And now I have to change already. So I think that's something I want to speak about, because it's so perfect in this time of like season of changes. Someone I was reading, someone mentioning how with the season of change, you get to visibly see in physical ways, leaves letting go, and how do we, as this year has been, whatever it has been, how do we allow the things that no longer serve us, right, serve our highest and brightest to just maybe fall away? And it makes me think of this beautiful life teaching lesson I received from the cherry blossom trees. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to go on a lifelong trip to Japan with my martial arts sensei and then also with my meditation teacher. So it was like this two-part trip that was so incredibly intense because there was so much going on, but also so amazing. And one of the things was we happened to be there at the time of the cherry blossoms, which is like a huge sight and scene in its of itself for the whole country.
Sure.
Right? They make cakes out of these cherry blossoms, they make teas. I mean, there's a whole thing about it because it's just so revered as part of their culture.
Mm.
And when I was there with the cherry blossoms trees blooming,
Mm.
there was also the period where they had bloomed long enough and the leaves and the petals were starting to fall away.
Yeah.
And at that point on this trip, I had kind of carried a question in my heart. I do this when I do trips and stuff like that, whether it's a meditation retreat, of like, what is it I would like to learn or grow, right? What would I want to gain from this trip? Just kind of like a healthy intention, if you will. And because the year before, my husband had just lost his father, this like theme of grief and loss was very big, right? And then grief and loss, I feel like, can happen in so many different aspects in our lives. It doesn't have to be a loved one passing, right?
Mm.
When a chapter ends in someone's life, right, it's also there can be a grief and loss that happens when someone finishes a school year, when someone finishes high school altogether. I think of
Mm.
some of my friends who had to transition their kids to college over the summer, right? And a huge ending and beginning for their children, but also in their household too, because now the kids are out of the house. So that's a whole nother transition that, even though it's celebratory and beautiful, there can genuinely have an underlying piece of grief and loss around that. And I want to name that and I want to acknowledge that
Mm.
and look at that a little bit today because I feel like in culture and society, I don't know if we've gotten all the right healthiest tools to address grief and loss. I think, especially in this Western culture, in
Mm.
the aging process, it's like if you get old, you kind of just get put somewhere or something like that, right? And the irony of it is in this Buddhist practice is,
Mm.
and I tell this to my clients, we all came to this world and we signed all the same contract. We're all going to die. Like
Yes.
whoever thought that they're getting out of that contract, it's been sold a lie. Okay, it's been sold
Right.
a lie because
Right.
everyone's going there,
Right.
and we just don't know when, right?
Certainly. Right.
And some sooner than later than others, some younger
Mm.
and then older than others, and it's something beyond all of us.
Mm.
And so it's not to necessarily get caught up with our ego of like, well, when am I going and how do I plan for that? And we get kind of very task oriented around it. But how do we really hold space of the preciousness of life in this present moment that we are given? How do we utilize that? And then how do we transition from that when things end, there naturally can have a sense of loss, and some of that loss comes with grief, right? So, what I have come to learn, and I continue to remind myself and as well as others, is whenever there's grief and there's sadness, people don't really ever want to be sad. And how many times have I seen people in my sessions because of the work I do with psychotherapy and they start crying, like, I don't want to cry. And I always tell them, I'm like, no one that I know of has ever died of tears or crying.
Right.
No one, no one. They die of other things. Trust
Right.
me. But they don't die of crying. So go ahead and cry. Like,
Yes.
who
It's
cares?
okay. Exactly. Yeah.
It's okay, let it out.
Right.
So that's one piece of just holding space of acceptance for that, because it can be such a I don't know, I don't want to say it's a stigma, just whatever avoidance, around crying in
Taboo.
this
Sure.
in
Yeah.
this society.
Yeah.
And the other piece around that reminder of when we have grief is second, it comes after a result of having had love in some way,
Mm.
having love or having loved some person, place, or thing.
Sure.
And that love, and therefore that love, no longer being able to be exchanged, is
Mm.
therefore some form of sadness or grief or loss. Like, oh, right, I
Oh,
can't, do this thing that I love to do with my friend because now they're at a different out of state college and I normally do, this with them. And that's our favorite thing to do.
mm.
Or it can be like a family member, passing, right?
Sure.
And it's like, wow, during the holidays, I remember this and this person doing these things that would bring a certain flavor to the holiday spirit or celebration, right? And it's just, we miss that and we feel the loss because there was that love that was exchanged initially, right? At the core
Mm.
foundation of that. So I have this beautiful lesson that I received from this cherry blossom um, petals when I was in Japan was I was holding this kind of intention of and question inside of like how can I move through grief and loss? How can I also support other people to move through grief and
Mm.
loss in a way that feels good, like in a way that feels peaceful or harmonious, right? And it isn't maybe so tumultuous, maybe isn't filled so much with turmoil or just a lot of that kind of struggle, the suffering, right, that
Sure.
comes with that. And as we were doing all these different visits to these Buddhist temples, one day we happened to just hang out on this temple grounds for a little longer as we were waiting for a friend to finish a call before we could then move on together as a group to the next thing. And I was trying to capture with my phone like these beautiful petals just like falling off the cherry blossom tree, like snowfall. It was so gorgeous. It was so gentle, it was so light. It had this pristine, pure beauty to it. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to get that on my phone. Oh my gosh, I missed that. Oh, how do I get this on my phone? And I would try to video record it, and I got so
Mhm.
many videos, and I replay. I was like, no, that doesn't look like what I just
Right.
saw.
Doesn't do it justice,
And I'm like,
right?
oh, damn, okay, I gotta try to get on the video. But when I stopped for a moment with all the trying to do
Right.
and just allowed myself to be present with the
Mm.
moment,
Mhm.
I, I was literally touched and brought to tears because I
Mm.
realized that the cherry blossom on these trees was teaching me a lesson of how we can let go of things, how we can have loss in our lives that can be beautiful, that can be gentle, that can be very sweet, in like a very sweet, bittersweet kind of a way, right?
Sure. Sure.
And just watching and kind of trying to feel into the cherry blossom tree of like, what does that feel like as it just gently lets all its petals, go. And then looking at the ground with all these gorgeous petals, I just wanted to pick them up because, it's like when you go to a wedding and the flower girls like throwing all the flower petals. I was like, oh, I need to pick that up and save it somewhere or something like that. But
Oh.
this profound moment of being with that moment really touched me and helped me experience the essence of life in some ways, right? The beginnings, the endings, how things fruit and come into fruition, blossom, bloom, so big, right? To the point now, then the petals drop away and it no longer is. And that is the cycle of this world that we're living in, right? And how then could I further embody that gentleness, that beauty and purity around these transitions of beginnings and endings with a little bit more of that grace, that kind of style of grace. And I think the biggest piece that kind of viscerally hit me was it can be bittersweet and can be sad and we can feel all those emotions, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And that was very, very good, like deep medicine I needed to hear because I feel like people hear the word death and they're like, and then they try to make, spooky jokes out of it. And then we try to like spoof on it more with Halloween and all this stuff like that. It's like, I'm not afraid of scary things. And now we're going to do haunted house or whatever it is. And instead, to have learned on a deeper level what gentleness means. And as I have come to learn, even as my teacher has shared with me, gentleness takes great strength. And I think of that also in our responsibilities, maybe as parents with little human beings that have a whole will and personality of their own. This is not something, I mean, yes, they come from you and through you, but I really don't think parents really have a lot of control of the personality because sometimes you're just like,
no.
You're like, are you sure that's your kid? and
right.
And as this great practice, which I feel like is very rooted in compassion, selflessness, loving kindness, which are all aspects of Buddhism, is gentleness. How, as the grown adult slash parent, caregiver, able to offer gentleness in this guiding force as this smaller little person is trying to figure out their way in the world and they want to try out things. They want to be curious about this, that, or the other. And so I add in this piece of, okay, we have gentleness, right, to hold this. It's like the ground space to hold all things in very loving, kind, compassionate ways. So now then we add on to the formula, right? We add on to the ingredients of this cake that we're baking of now we need some healthy boundaries, right? And healthy boundaries are structures. I think of like a fence. If you have a huge piece of land, a farmland or something, healthy boundaries are like the fence that helps the animals that you're caring for on your land, right? Or the humans, whatever, to know, okay, this is this space and this is what this space is allocated for. And when you go beyond this boundary line, this fence, like this, something else differently is happening, right? Just like within states in the US, right? You cross state lines, there can be different laws relevant in different states, right? And that is a healthy boundary as a way of talking about things. I think some people think that, or have the misnomer, the illusion that if I put up a fence in my big yard, nothing's going to come over it. It'll never get knocked down, and people will respect it, and they just know. And I would say that is actually probably expectations that probably are unrealistic and might lead to some self-sabotaging behaviors that would trigger anger, frustration, any of these other
all the
emotions that could create further suffering. And so I feel like the healthy perspective as we're adding in the ingredients on the cake is healthy boundaries is a guiding structure to allow and achieve what it is we want to allow and achieve. It's, you can even consider like a trail on a hiking trail, a form of a healthy boundary, right? You walk on that healthy boundary, you get to see and experience certain things. And usually it's carved out and maintained in a safe, healthy way so that, hey, you get to have some cool views and enjoy nature, being respectful of all the other animals that are living in the other side brushes, right? And so healthy boundaries has this very symbiotic relationship in human relationships and human dynamics, whether that's parent child, whether that's coworker, whether that's friend, whether that's partner. It could be within any relational dynamic. And then so the next piece, these two pieces, along healthy boundaries, I feel like the obvious would be there's open, healthy, honest communication that's happening within this realm that then can allow these two other pieces of personal accountability and personal responsibility to come into play. And these two I have found are such valuable pieces in our spiritual path and practice. And the reason why is when we are maintaining personal responsibility and accountability for ourselves, it holds our practice to be always kind of tuned in to true north, if you will. And there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of distraction in the world today. So if we aren't able to call our own bullshit off of our own bullshit, I just wonder how deeply we can go in our personal practice. Deeply in the sense of like how deep of a refinement can we actually achieve if we are not being personally responsible and accountable for our time, life, and mind, essentially, which sounds like a lot, but I feel like is what is encapsulated in mindfulness practice. We watch our thoughts, we think, so then we also then are mindful of our words we speak and then our actions that we follow through with. And when we have all three of those in an alignment, if you will, I would call that personal responsibility and accountability resulting in impeccability, right? And impeccability is this wonderful, beautiful word, which I think of is very similar to the four agreements. I don't know if you've heard of the four agreements. Yes?
Yes, I have.
So in the four agreements, the four are, be impeccable with your word. The second one is always do your best. The other one, don't take anything personally. And the last one, don't make any assumptions, right? Which I love that book. I love Miguel Ruiz, maybe, I think is his name. Maybe it's not Don, I think it's Miguel Ruiz. So off the impeccability of our word and what comes from being impeccable through our personal responsibility and accountability, I think of this graph. If we were to have our life in this graph, like this linear XY graph, if we have this like spectrum of how we operate in life, so there's this like variance, right? This high, high, low, low at any moment and given day. When we are impeccable with our word, usually we are also doing our best. And we're always doing our best. I think of that as like always hitting our high highs. And every day and every moment is different. So maybe today's variance is down here, but if you're always doing your best, you're still at the top point of this piece. And then if tomorrow changes, because I don't know, there's a whole bunch of energy that felt super supportive for you. It went a little bit higher. You're doing your best and being impeccable. You're again hitting the highest point, right? And I feel like as the graph was to graph itself out, even though there might be some subtle ups and downs, the overarching graph would demonstrate a what? An increase over time. Because even if we're having the bad day, as long as we're doing our best, we've hit the highest possible point of that variance, right? And that allows us on a full average the the like increase exponential momentum, right, of going in a positive direction. So I share that as like this world view, kind of like this big view, as we kind of drill down into the kind of the microscopic view of how impeccability can work, because we don't necessarily see the long-term thing when we're in that moment. We're just like, okay, man, I was impeccable, but that felt really cruddy.
Right.
That was really hella stressful. Ugh, right. And that's that moment. We're just seeing that one point on that graph. We have not taken that 10,000-foot view to be like, oh, wait, that was really stressful, but dang, look where I came from. Like, whoa, that's like way 10 times better than how I would have handled. Look how much I've grown. Look how much I have refined myself. And this is the practice. I don't know how else to kind of put it. And I think maybe for some Western societal culture, this is like, oh, that's it. Okay, done. Got the answer. Right? It feels so simple, and then it feels kind of mundane, and then it's boring, and it's not exciting anymore. And I get that. That's kind of like, okay, watching the same Netflix series episode over and over and over again for like the next 10 years. You're like, yeah, that for sure it feels dumb, mundane, and boring. It's what might look that way on the surface, on the surface area, but in reality, from the kind of Eastern cultural perspective, and I think of Japan as a great example, the things that they do in that world culture is incredible, because they are constantly and continuously refining themselves. That when I was purchasing things like incense or like a ceramic pottery mug to bring home, the level of craftsmanship that I would see or feel from this thing, that I could just really feel that embedded with not being okay with just good enough. Like they were absolutely seeking, excellence beyond perfection, that I super admired, and I honor deeply. That is part of their culture. I'm sure some others would look at it and say there are detriments to that aspects, but I feel like on one level, that level of refinement that comes from that Eastern culture sometimes gets lost here in the States. And I think maybe even I wouldn't even say that the it's lost. I feel like we back in the day, and now might date myself and my husband. It's like, man, back in the day when things were made, it was so much sturdier. Now I got to replace this every couple of years. What's going on? Like I got to spend more money. I got to spend more money. And then maybe he'll pull out this like Tupperware glass steel container in the kitchen that his mom had. And I'm like, holy cow, that thing still works. It's incredible, like the amount of quality that has just kind of been, I don't know, lost or not so much honed in, because the newer mentality is quicker, faster, right now, sooner, better. I'm happier. And
right.
And there is absolutely a place for that. Do not get me wrong. I love my technology. And yet, when we are looking at our own personal spiritual practice, how do we bring back kind of the, dare I say, old school ways, right? Of things that look very simple and mundane, of a seated meditation practice, ideally twice a day, morning and night, right? That looks very boring on the outside. You're sitting, you're doing nothing. You could be doing so many things. And yet, meditation is so powerful in that it shifts our state of mind. That's one thing.
Yes.
Secondly, is it allows us to turn off. And I don't think we have fully come to, I feel like there is a movement that's happening, come to recognize the value of turning off.
Yes.
Because when we turn off, because we're so plugged in, right?
Sure.
Calendar notifications, ding, 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 text messages, and then you guys go do not disturb.
Right. Yes, right.
And then that alone, how much is going on up here because we're so in this tech world, our minds are also going just as fast, if not faster.
Oh, that's not healthy. Yeah.
Right. So, and I think some people have this misnomer that if I stop and turn off, like a seated meditation practice, I'm not being productive. And they feel restless, right? And they feel antsy because they're feeling like they have to compulsively move this energy in some way.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I think of it like the metaphor of a hamster on a hamster wheel. When you're just running, and okay, you feel like you're making great ground. Yes, you sure are, little hamster. Just
right.
a little circle.
Going around.
There's a lot of energy expenditure. And yet when they stop and they like as a form of like turning off,
sure,
you have this moment of awareness, which is what I feel like meditation practice brings to us, where we're like, oh, I think I want to go get some food or water over there in my cage. And they walk off the whole wheel.
Yeah.
And then a whole new world of possibilities is possible, right? And that's how, as a way of talking about it in the most elementary way, meditation working in this world today, and how it is and can be so valuable when we start to develop that personal practice consistently. I know I have gained, nth degree exponential gains from it, and this is hence why I am here today doing what I do. It's powerful, and it's so powerful and so obvious that no one wants to do it. It's like, this is how you can change your life. This is how you can be happier.
Right. It's here for you.
I need to go work more hours. I need to make my $1 million. I need to blah, 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 blah. Find the person of my dreams. I need to
check off my list. Exactly.
Yes, my list has to happen.
Yep. Oh boy. I'm guilty of that. I've done that.
Don't worry, I'm a taskmaster myself.
Yes.
So, any thoughts or questions on that before we go do a meditation together?
Oh.